Welcome to On Scene with GoJoe Patrol, the podcast where community safety meets real stories from the street. We'll share emerging trends in private security with the lessons and tips we've learned over our almost 30 years in business. We will also go beyond the patrol vehicle to talk with the people, various organizations, and businesses who are doing great work here in our community every day. I'm your host, Harry Sladich. Now, let's get on scene. All right, well, good afternoon. I'm very, very excited to have Spokane County Sheriff John Nowels with us here today. As a security guard company, we like to have nice relationships with law enforcement. I'm going to give them just a little bio of you because I know you, but I want to mention some fun things that I like. Number one, you're a local boy, Central Valley. You have your Bachelor of Arts from the Eastern Washington, although you did go get your master's in organizational leadership from the University of Oklahoma. We'll forgive you for that. And then you're training at Quantico with the FBI. But when I thought about my career, and this is about you, but what struck me is I started out as a busboy in a hotel coffee shop. Mm-hmm. And I worked up to a chief operating officer of a hotel company, right? Well, you started out in patrol and traffic in 1998, and then you worked literally investigations, leadership, command, lieutenant, inspector, undersheriff. You literally took that path all the way up.
I did, and before I got into law enforcement, I worked full-time through college and had almost a full-time job, in high school. I started out working at the Food Rainbow, which is now the grocery outlet down there on Havana and Sprague. The guy who lived across the street from me owned that store, was kind enough to give me a job, and then went to work for Central Premix Concrete Company right as I was getting into college. Had a very young family at a very young age, and had a kind gentleman who let me go to work there for $6 an hour, chipping concrete out of concrete drums in the winter and acid washing the exterior of the trucks. And they gave me an opportunity once I was old enough to get a CDL, and I drove concrete truck for a couple of years.
You did as well?
I absolutely did.
I was going to ask
for about 3 years.
That's a fun fact.
Yeah. So it was good. And the Murphy brothers, who owned Central Premix back in the day, fantastic men to work for. They provided me a real good opportunity to support a young family at the time. It was a lot of work, but again, work ethic will get you a long ways in this life, and
it will.
And here I am.
Isn't that fascinating? So, what drew you to? So, my question is that I'm glad you added that because it looked like you were laser focused. My business partner Major was laser focused on being law enforcement, and he went straight there. But what said I want to go this direction? What was it?
It was funny. If you would have asked me when I was 19, 20 years old if I had even considered law enforcement as a career, and I would have told you absolutely not. Never considered it. Was not in the family blood anywhere. But growing up in church, we had particularly in seminary at the time, we had a FBI agent who was one of our seminary instructors, and it was always fun to hear his stories. And I actually wanted to be a chemical engineer, is what I really started out at Eastern for. And I'll be honest, it was organic chemistry that got me. And I remember sitting in a chemistry class.
Took you out? It took me out.
Yeah. It just, again, working full time, 2 kids, a wife at the time. So it was pretty busy. And I probably wasn't giving my chemistry studies the due diligence that it needed. So I remember sitting in my organic chemistry class going, I'm not really having fun with this. And what makes me think I want to do this for a living? And one of my friends sitting next to me says, hey, I'm going to go check out this criminal justice program. I got a couple friends in it. It sounds exciting. And by the way, without telling my wife that I was thinking about changing my major or anything like that at the time, I went and took a criminal justice class and I went, oh, this is intriguing. This is something that I could get interested in. So started going through the class, had that conversation with my wife after a quarter of classes going a different way. She wasn't quite sure what to think, and did my internship my senior year at the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. And even then I thought I would be, federal law enforcement looks good. Obviously I knew a family friend who had been an FBI agent. I thought that'd be great. Maybe Secret Service would be cool. And I remember my first day at Kootenai County Sheriff's Office, the sergeant that was taking me around and showing me around said, you want to do federal law enforcement? Are you sure about that? And I said, well, yeah, I think it'd be great. He goes, By the end of this, you're not going to want anything to do with the feds. And it turned out he was right. What a great organization the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office was at the time, and likely still is. Yes. And I was hooked. From then on, I knew there was nothing else I wanted to do. And and I will say, here we are 29 years later, and still can't think of anything else I would have rather done. Yeah.
It's funny. When Major Jeff Sale was his lieutenant on the state patrol, and he had the 50% of this company in its early inception. All it did is put off-duty state troopers into situations. Right. So Jeff wanted out, and I had always wanted to be a police officer, but I had been married. And so my wife said, you should have told me that before we got married. You can't do that. And so I said, okay, but I'll buy this security company, and then I can kind of get a little bit of the action and the fun a little bit, and kind of got into it as if I can't be one, I'll be kind of maybe a poser a little bit. I want to be a poser, but I'll have security there. But I always, what I loved about the hotel business, and I think what I saw about this is it's always different. So in a hotel, we had domestic violence, we had drunks, we had theft, we had, unfortunately, suicides. We had, it's 500 people living in a hotel above each other, and there's alcohol, but it was always something, go. And when I rode with my friends with SPD, and then certainly with Major, it was like, what's next? So was that the allure for you?
That is a huge part of what makes this job so unique and so exciting. If I look back at going, okay, if I had to go to I go to a desk every day now, but nothing's ever the same. I still never know what's walking in my door. But what is so exciting about the law enforcement career is you never know what's going to happen next. You never know what you're going to be able to anticipate. And I remind my people all the time, as frustrating as things can be, and we do see, awful things, we're exposed to so much more traumatic events than any other individual is ever supposed to. But I have to remind them, you guys, this is still the best show on earth. Yep. And you have to have that attitude. I mean, you're surprised by people, disappointed by people, but surprised. And there's nothing more fun than getting to the end of something, solving it, making people safe, making sure our community's there, and then stepping back and laughing with your friends about what did we just see. Yep. This has to be real because people couldn't make this up. I mean, and I think that's maybe what the draw is to shows like Cops, as curated as that can be at times, because you're not seeing the boring stuff. Right. But as curated as shows like that and live PD, but that's why they're so popular, is because it's just wacky sometimes, really human behavior, and it's entertaining.
Yep. We watch and say, why do they run? I mean, why do they run? They always take off in their car. They're going to get caught. Right. They're going to get caught. Yeah. And then I tell myself, if I was a cop, I would make sure that I was really in shape, because running after those guys for that long, it was just, Major told me a story once that he was a sheriff, and there was a call out, and they were running, and they had just finished a heavy lunch, and they were trying to run after this guy, after they just had this massive meal, and it was just like, this is not the right time to do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as you mature in your career, you realize that running and chasing after everybody isn't always the best idea. There are other ways to do it and not get yourself hurt, injured, things like that. But sometimes it's just, why do you chase? Well, because they ran.
Yes, don't run. Yeah. When you say you sit at your desk, I knew this, but I don't think a lot of people, they think of you as the sheriff and they think of you in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. But if you step back and you look at what you oversee, the last stats that I had were about 275 deputies. I don't know if that's still in line with that. Yeah. You have a workforce of between 500 and 1,000 total employees. You have a multi-million-dollar budget. I mean, the sheriff's department, with its budget and with its employees, dwarfs most businesses in Spokane County. Yeah. And I don't think people look at it from the perspective of, not only are you enforcing the law, but you're running a major organization.
Right. I mean, well, all said and told, we're about 350 employees with our commission staff and our civilian staff. We were about twice that back when the sheriff's office had the jail. We don't have the jail anymore.
Okay.
Which is good in a lot of ways. So, but to your point, people see me as, he's the guy out on the side of the road and, pulling people over and responding to calls. And while that occasionally happens, frankly, I'm an administrator. To run an organization like that and to make sure that we're compliant with all of our laws. And again, to your point, a 60-something plus $1 million budget annually. I'm the CEO of a fairly decent sized organization.
You are?
And so that takes a lot of time.
And what's frustrating when I read that is, whether it be elected officials, whether it be the general public, they think your opinion's just coming from the law enforcement perspective, and they lose touch with you're a CEO of an organization that deals with human beings, budgets, forecasting, equipment, everything that they deal with. And so your perspective is just not one single line. It's the whole broad county and running that thing. And I think some people forget sometimes that your skill set is quite diverse to be able to do that.
Yeah, that is completely accurate. And, unlike some companies where you have a narrow band of customers, people who are purchasing your products and things like that, well, I have about 550,000 customers that I have to make sure that I am serving to the best way possible. Yep. Only difference is I'm taking money from them, and I'm not necessarily providing services to every single one, but I have to take the needs of every citizen, every, person we come into contact with and every person we serve into account when I'm making decisions. And my life experience, having lived in Spokane County now for 52 of my 53 years, informs all that and all the values. And I think that's probably why, I think my way of administering public safety in Spokane County resounds with a lot of people here is because my values come from this community. I was raised here. So a lot of the things that voters and people want to see, well, I represent a lot of that because it was instilled in me from a young age. I moved here when I was just shy of 8 months old, and I've been here ever since.
Yep. Me too.
And so, when we talk about politically, what political leanings might be, but the kind of things that influence people's politics, like, generally in Spokane, doesn't really matter what part of the political aisle on, you're pretty fiscally conservative. We, have the culture in Spokane is do more with less, work hard, don't say, no, we can't do that. We do everything you say, we can do that. We should do that. And I think that means a lot to our voters that they have people in leadership positions that feel that way, think that way, because it's of who we are as a community.
Correct. I've often said that, Spokane's a little engine that could. I think I can. I knew I could. I knew it could. And we've pulled off some pretty amazing things in this community when we all said we're going to get together. What's nice about the community is it's a large community, but you can get a hold of leadership in this community. You can get a hold of CEOs of organizations. You can get to speak to the mayor. You can speak to the county commissioner. You can get to them. Now, you may not always agree with them, but you can have a dialogue. And where some of these larger cities and municipalities, how the heck would I ever approach them? So I think we're lucky with that. What would you say to people that say, okay, you've grown up here, you certainly understand the community, but things are changing, and you just don't understand that. How does the Sheriff's Department stay up on best practices in communities, new ways of looking at things, new ways of dealing with situations? What is there some sort of continuing education that you go to or the team goes to, or is it just?
Yeah, I think what happens quite a bit. So we have an association in the state of Washington called the Washington Associations of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, and I promise I did not intentionally wear my polo shirt for WASPIC today. And that organization exists solely to advocate for, best practices in policing, navigating and advocating for good legislation in Washington state, and making sure that we are providing the training for our leaders that is necessary to help us navigate all the things that get thrown at a law enforcement leader these days. And again, I mentioned it earlier, just the changing dynamics of legislation that's happened, particularly in the last 6 years, but also, trying to offer constructive input to the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission to make sure that the profession of policing is elevated as much as possible. I don't know how unique my perspective is, but from I'd say a very early point in my career, I got very interested in human performance. I always have. I don't know that it was a conscientious thing on my part, but when raising my kids, the way I was raised by my parents, and now the way I lead in my organization, I want every person that comes to work for the sheriff's office, I want my children all to perform at whatever they're doing at the highest level that they can. Always strive to be better, always strive to do things just a little bit better than we did the day before. And I think as we do that, as we raise the water level inside an organization, or, as a person raises their own internal standards for performance, we can keep pushing this human experiment, in this country forward.
Yep. Well, and you certainly exude that. Your predecessor, Ozzie, integrity is certainly woven through what you do. What oftentimes, and I've had this conversation with Major, I understand that the police unions and the unions play a role. Sometimes they seem to be in conflict with the management, right? Where you're going to hold them accountable. I certainly knew of instances where Ozzie had to basically go against that and say this isn't right. And I asked him once, why do you do it when you know you're going to lose? And he says, I do it because I want people to know that I care. Right. And so how is that relationship, and how do you balance that still? Is that evolved at all, or is it kind of still there?
Well, I will say for me, Ozzie was 100% correct in making sure that our integrity is above reproach. I hold the same standards, but we don't necessarily have the conflict inside the sheriff's office between our union and the management team right now.
That's great.
Some of it has to do with, I've worked with these men and women
I know, I was just going to say,
for 29 years.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Yep.
I've worked with them for 29 years side by side. They know that I know. Yep. And I've been where they're at. They know that. I have personal relationships with union leadership. Yep. And part of my personality, and frankly, some of the union leadership personalities are, okay, we're going to make sure that, number one, we protect the integrity of not just the sheriff's office, but the integrity of our profession. We know that. And we will do everything we can to hold everybody to high standards, but be fair at the same time. Yes. And that's gone a long ways in my personal relationship with the union and my command staff's relationship with the union. And frankly, a lot of my command staff are former union presidents and everything like that. And I will say, we hire people with integrity. Yes. I know you hear a lot, in the public about, oh, these cops are this, these cops are that, and we're constantly getting attacked.
Yeah. And you are unfairly, but anyway.
And our people, it is unfair. It's just like, how fair is it that when you have somebody who, let's say a teacher or an attorney who does something that doesn't meet the standards or meet the ethical guidelines of any profession, and yet you paint with a broad brush everybody in there, and then all of a sudden the assumption is they're all doing that. Correct. But that's what's happened with police. And there are times where I just scratch my head and say, I think we might be the only profession with integrity left, because we know there are rules. We know there are lines, or I have this conversation with our prosecuting attorney all the time, because our integrity is getting attacked over and over. And it's like, I think we're the last people holding each other accountable. Yeah. And so that gets frustrating. And but again, if I ensure, as the leader of this organization, that if people don't meet our standards, that they're disciplined appropriately. You know, not everybody deserves to be fired for things that come out of their mouths. Not everybody deserves, you know, to have their name dragged through the mud publicly for a mistake. And so it's my job to make sure I navigate that and I'm fair. And again, I will not do anything. And I've had this hard conversations with people who have asked me as the sheriff to do things that I've had to look at him and say, I care about you. I care about the things that you're looking for. And these people outside the agency, but I will never do anything that tarnishes the reputation of policing, the office of sheriff, or my agency. I will not do it. That's something that we will not compromise.
Well, I think that's why you're so well received and liked, and I think that's really important. We're very lucky to have that leadership. When I look at the industry that I'm in, and we were just looking at projections of the private security company, it is scheduled to double again in revenues, and a lot of the reasoning behind that, and it's not going to be, everyone thinks it's going to be replaced with robots and drones, and it'll be a part of it, but it will still be that human element of the guard going there. A lot of the growth is coming from individuals saying there's so much grief given as a law enforcement officer, and I'm being photoed, and I'm being recorded, I'm being tricked into saying things that I don't want to do it. And so that recruitment problem seems to get worse and worse, and private security is filling in for the petty crimes and whatever. How is your recruitment going? How are you doing with that? And what are some of the trends you're seeing in making sure that the departments stay full?
We actually in the sheriff's office have been very, very successful in the last 3 or 4 years. Is when I have 8 laterals coming in at the end of June from different places in the state, different places across the country. I will have really maybe 1 or 2 vacant positions. Wow, and we always have retirements and stuff that will come up in the meantime. So you're never it's always a brief moment where you can say, I don't have any vacant positions. But, we focused on that in the last 4 years. I think after my first year, I sat down with my command staff and other members throughout the department, union leadership, a couple community leaders, and we did a strategic plan. And we identified, all of our threats to the organization that would make it harder for us to deliver the services our citizens expect. And at the center of every single one of those threats was our manpower issues. I think at the time we were down 50 positions that we had funding for that we didn't have bodies in. That was 3 years ago.
Wow.
And so we set about changing our hiring practices, streamlining it, getting to candidates faster. There's always competition between law enforcement agencies about the good candidates. There's only so many good candidates. And most of us, even when I was hired by the sheriff's office, it was like, hey, I applied to 3 or 4 different places, and really whoever picks me first is who's going to get me. And we were losing that battle with a couple of different agencies because we were just so slow. So we changed some of our civil service processes, changed some of the way we handle our paperwork flows, our background investigation flows. We didn't change our standards at all. But we got to people faster. And here we are 3 years later, and we've been fully staffed for the better part of a year now. So it took us about 2 years.
That is great.
And, some of it comes from, reputation from within. And I had some real long, hard conversations with my staff about, hey, we all know people who are interested in law enforcement who might not be in it. And what kind of picture are you painting? Yes, everybody was frustrated, from 2020, actually from about 2018 on, this whole national narrative about what law enforcement was and how we were just awful. And it made it hard to keep people, number one, and it made it hard to recruit people. But as time went on, I made sure our people were saying, listen, I'm going to make sure you guys are trained. and make sure that you're trained very, very well so you can go out and act confidently.
Give them the tools to do their job.
Yeah, and without going on too much of a rabbit trail on a different topic, the legislation that was imposed in 2021, 2022, 2023, the legislature, specifically Jamie Peterson I'm going to change the face of what law enforcement looks like in the state of Washington. And really, it basically gave law enforcement officers in this state the idea that you're going to get thrown in jail if you make a mistake. We've always been able to be sued, everything like that. And if cops commit crimes, they deserve to be prosecuted. And if jail is the appropriate punishment, they deserve it. But there was this huge push to say, we are, number one, they changed the laws. They made them a little more ambiguous in some of their wording, and made very, very stern penalties. And it made cops really unsure on how to act and when. Now they're putting their personal, their personal safety every day. They've been putting their personal safety on the line, but now they're putting their freedom on the line. Mm-hmm. And they got cautious. It's like, what if I make a mistake? I can end up in jail for that. And it's just a mistake. I wasn't intentionally doing it. And so, my approach to that was, we need to make sure that we give our people enough training that they know when they come across a situation that they can act confidently, that they know what their lawful authority is, that they're confident in their ability to employ the right tactics, to employ them effectively, escalate, de-escalate, when the time's right. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that.
Well, it sounds like it really helped retention.
It did.
You give that clarity, then.
And then it got people talking to their friends. Yeah. When people come in and do ride-alongs, they ride with our people, and they hear, we give more training than any other agency in the area. And that means something to people. And it means something when you're a young cop, when you're overwhelmed with all of the things that you have to know. And lay people just don't understand what we demand of our law enforcement people, how to interact with people, all of the things that they have to know and consider in split seconds. So to be able to come into an organization and say, yes, you're going to go to the basic law enforcement academy, but we're going to give you 8 weeks of high-level training before you go in there. And then we're going to give you another 4 weeks of high level training after that. And then you're going to go out into the field training car for another 3 months. Our people walk out a lot more confident, and the word gets around. I've had laterals who have had 6-7 years of experience coming from large California agencies, LAPD, Riverside County. Transferring here. And when I speak with them after they go through our training process, they said, you guys train better than anybody else does. So that's made a huge difference in our recruiting. And more importantly to me, yes, it's nice that we're getting people in the door. But more importantly for me is I can go talk to our community, which I do very, very frequently. Yes, you do. And I can say, to the best of my ability, I am putting the best trained cops out on the street. So it makes a huge difference. Reputation goes a long ways. Not to get too political, but it's probably a little bit easier to work for an elected sheriff these days than it is in some people for, appointed chiefs who are at the whim of people who are not law enforcement. Decision makers are mayors, city managers, city council, who tend to not have any law enforcement experience. So, if they find an elected individual who sets the policy, who's the one holding them accountable and disciplining them, there's a little bit more internal comfort with them. And that's not just for me, it's for any elected sheriff. Yeah.
Well, and everything that you just spelled out is what every CEO of any company is doing. They're trying to figure out, how do I retain these people? How do I train them better? And again, I think people forget that the fundamentals of what you do the product is law enforcement, but it's the same fundamentals at a macro level. Speaking of, the issues as it relates to, legislators and city councils, and the state of Washington has. It was Senate Bill 5974, and that was something that was actually signed into law by Governor Ferguson, and you, along with some other chiefs, sued the state to stop it. Can you tell me just give our listeners an idea of what that wanted to accomplish and maybe why did it start? How did this even come up?
So this piece of legislation was the final piece of a package of legislation that the Washington State Legislature and frankly the Democratic Caucus started initiating back in 2020. And by the way, this was done nationwide. A lot of people think that what happened is unique to Spokane or into the state of Washington, and it's not. A lot of these laws were being pushed through legislatures across the United States. And of course, depending on, which political party was in control, really dictated which ones actually got signed into law. And, of course, we have one party control in this state, and it's been that way for a long time. So they got this legislation swept in, and this particular bill with the modernization of sheriffs and chiefs of police roles and accountability was what they had defined as their crowning jewel of this legislation. And really what's driven this piece of legislation was really advocated for by the Center for Police Accountability in Washington State, like the NAACP. Oddly enough, and I'll explain why I think it's odd, the League of Women Voters advocated for this legislation. And this is really dealing with a couple of different things, but it's all politically motivated. If people remember back to the COVID years when they had mask mandates, and the people who were really for these mask mandates wanted people who were violating the mask mandates arrested, and the only group of people who were standing up and saying, like, I don't know that that's what we want to do, were your elected sheriffs. There were a few city people who had different political viewpoints who also didn't do it. But if you tie that into, there's been a handful of sheriffs who have spoken vocally out against, enforcing some red flag laws, things like that. And you all of a sudden get advocates who are sure that this legislation is the cure-all, now really want to be able to do something to an elected official who won't do what the legislature says. Kind of ignoring that, separate but equal balance of powers between the branches of government.
Or that the voters put you into that position.
Right. And yes, they have the authority to make laws, but in the executive branch, I also have the authority to not enforce them if I don't want to. I can't enforce a law that doesn't exist, but if I think something is unconstitutional, I swore an oath to say it's not constitutional, or to say I wouldn't enforce something that violates the Constitution. But I also have the purview, depending on manpower, what the actual threat to the public is. Do I dedicate resources to something that I don't think is going to have an impact or might even be lawful? So that legislation comes out from this bill comes out of that type of a political environment where they're like, okay, now we're going to take out the people who are the last people standing in our way. I don't want to be too much of a tinfoil hat, maker and wearer, but if you have certain gun legislation that you want to get passed, and maybe the idea is, the only way we're going to make our citizens and our community safe is to take people's guns away. Well, you're going to have to get rid of the people who are going to stand up and say no. So this legislation comes about, and it's billed as modernizing standards for sheriffs and chiefs. And, it wasn't necessarily in the language of the legislation, but they say, these sheriffs and chiefs should have the same accountability as the people that work for them. And they used it under the framework of the peace officer certification that is given by the state. By the way, I've been a certified peace officer for a little over 28 and a half years now. Yep. And, there's a list of standards that, by the way, were updated and modernized back in about 2022, 2023. That, said, hey, of course, a deputy can't, or a police officer can't do egregious things, and keep their certification. Makes sense. But there's also some things that allows this board of people who sit on the Criminal Justice Training Commission to remove a peace officer certification for really any kind of conduct that might be unbecoming. Some things that are specified are, discriminating against anybody, or expressing viewpoints that are discriminatory, or associating with extremist groups or anything like that. By the way, no definition of what those things are, because that's up for the board to decide. So, anything you put on social media, anything that you put in writing could result in your peace officer certification to be revoked, right? And they've had the authority to revoke.
If you had that revoked, you couldn't be sheriff then?
Well, that's the part that they're not talking about. The advocates for this bill are like, oh, well, the sheriffs, they should be accountable too. And it's like, well, yeah, I am accountable. You can remove my peace officer certification. You can remove peace officer certification for anybody in the state. But they've never had, the CJTC has never had the authority to fire anyone. They can remove one of my deputies' peace officer certification. Then it's up to me to decide whether I can have them doing something that allows them to be employed by me or not. You have this issue of, I, as the sheriff, am given constitutional authority, it's broad constitutional authority to enforce the law, keep the peace, serve civil processes, things like that. It has nothing to do with a peace officer certification. And what this legislation tries to do is codify that my constitutional authority doesn't mean anything. Only the peace officer certification and the authorities given by the legislature mean anything. Back in 1976 or 78, I think, the Criminal Justice Training Commission was established for the right reasons. You can imagine what policing was back in mid to late 1970s. Yep. I don't think we were recognized as being a profession that was, raising the standards and becoming professional. So, and the training across the state was there was nothing. There were no best practices, and it really was agency dependent. So they formed this commission to raise the bar for training and set minimum standards, which is a good thing. But now here we are 50 years later, it's now transitioning into something else that's controlled by the legislature and the governor's office. So this legislation gives them the authority to not only revoke my peace officer certification, but now it allows the CJTC to actually fire a chief of police and fire an elected sheriff in ways that they've never had the authority. And they still wouldn't have the authority to do with my peace officers now.
So back to the third rail topic of masks, but you as the sheriff are saying, okay, look, I've got to look at my bandwidth and what's going on, and do I have the bandwidth to arrest people for not wearing a mask? I think most people would say you don't. I mean, I don't know how you would possibly manage that. And you're saying, look, I'm not weighing in on whether you should or shouldn't. I'm just saying that to manage this process, it's not even feasible to continue with our mission. And so therefore I'm choosing not to. They could say, no, you don't. We're going to, okay. Yeah.
They could say, you're not meeting your peace officer certification standards. You're out of office. Yep. They could do it for anything. I mean, there are many instances of elected sheriffs in Washington State's history that said things or did things that they didn't like. Might not have been a crime. That they tried recall processes. Some of them have been successwell. And by the way, that's where the authority should lie. Yes. The voters put me into office. Voters should be the one who get to decide whether I stay or not.
Correct. And you said voter sovereignty was one of your objections, the unconstitutional mechanism of it, and the disqualifying candidates. A state judge was it a Supreme Court? Who blocked it? It was blocked for now.
Judge Schaller out of Thurston County, and I would implore people, if this topic interests you, there you can go and listen to her 40-minute decision that she rendered.
How do you spell the name?
Scheller.
Scheller. Okay, and so she is the one that kind of weighed in on it.
She did. She gave a 40-minute opinion and did a fantastic job, in my humble opinion, at least where granting our temporary injunction is concerned. I think she pretty much took the state to the woodshed on this one and said, I think at least right now, if this law is allowed to go into effect, that the constitutional rights, our First Amendment rights as sheriffs could be infringed upon. And she said that she felt we had substantially proved that our First Amendment rights would be affected. And also the rights of the citizens to, number one, stand for election, because remember, any citizen can stand for election.
Yes.
And also the citizens' right to select their sheriff. So she,
But it's not dead.
No, it's not
paused.
dead. We got an injunction. The state appealed to the state Supreme Court for a stay of that. They went before a Supreme Court commissioner who denied the state's motion for a stay. And so now we're back in the pipeline to have the rest of the arguments go before Judge Schaller, and then she will make a final ruling on that. So we're still
And they
at
could
the
appeal
beginning
that
stage.
as well.
Absolutely, we fully expect they will.
Is the commission or the committee that's pushing this, is that a 10-year deal? I mean, not 10-year deal. Is it are they there for a period of time, or are they there for as long as it takes? Are they elected into these positions?
So the Criminal Justice Training Commission is not elected. They are appointed by the governor.
Okay, so they could stay there as long as the governor wants them to stay there?
Yes, they could. Okay. And as long as they're interested. The state legislature in 2022, 2023 did designate, who was on that commission as far as what part of the community they represent. There's a minority of law enforcement officers. There are advocates, people who are impacted by the justice system, and we all know what that means. Advocacy groups, some federal partners and things like that. But essentially what this is we have this professional license we have to be law enforcement officers, and the people who get to decide whether we keep that license or not are not people who have been in law enforcement. In fact, some of them intentionally don't like law enforcement or are critics of law enforcement, and they get to decide whether our conduct is appropriate or not. And I liken this to, wouldn't it be weird if, the medical licensing board was composed of people who not only don't have medical licenses and have no medical training, but maybe have had bad medical care or had somebody die because of the result of bad medical care, and they get to decide whether a doctor keeps their license or not. It's just, it's ridiculous, and that's the way the legislature worked it.
That's going to be something to watch for sure. Switching gears, and I've never asked you this question, and we obviously are a security guard company. GoJoe Patrol is, right? And back in 2011, we, I went to Major and I said, buddy, I want to change our perception. I don't want to be the look-alike. I don't want to look like a police officer anymore. I want us to look like security guards and behave like security guards and operate within our authority and don't push that. And thankfully, he agreed that we would go with more of a de-escalation, more of a lead with questions, not commands. We had some of our clients say we didn't look tough enough or whatever, but what we were seeing in that space, at least I was some really serious situations as it relates with security guards and situations. Here in Spokane County, we're all aware of, up north, the security officer stopped the father and son. They were dirt biking. The guy hit the sign. The security guard chased him. Ultimately, there was a confrontation. He shot both of them. The father died. The son was wounded. It's maybe they're detaining people when they wouldn't. So I guess my question is, how do you look at the relationship? Because security is going to be there. They're going to be there when you get on scene. They're going to call you. Sometimes they may cause the problem, but in a best practice world, how do those organizations work alongside with one another? I mean, we happen to have a pretty good idea because one of the partners was in law enforcement. But from your perspective, with security guarding companies, what do they do well and what do they do wrong and what should they be doing?
Well, I
don't know the answer to what you're going to say, but I want to hear it.
And I think there's a couple different things that we could talk about here, but you and I are both in the business of risk management. Right. I mean, everything we deal with every day is risk. Our people
at different levels, yes.
But our people are out there dealing with risk. They're making decisions based on risk. And to your point, when you started talking about, know what our role in any situation is, that's important for both security. It's important for both law enforcement. And if you stay in your lane and know what your role is, you can make clearer decisions that really reduce the risk for everybody involved, the people you're interacting with, to the degree that we can control that, right? I mean, we're going to run into a certain part of the population where nothing we do is going to mitigate the risk they pose to the citizens, to us, to anybody else. But to the degree of, make sure that our people are out there mentally and physically prepared to make the right decision. And again, when you walk into a situation understanding, okay, what my authority here is, take a security guard. Is my authority here, do I have the authority to arrest and detain people? And it depends on the situation. You may, but a lot of times you don't. So to what end are you going to interact with somebody before you're out in a place that you don't want to be, where now all of a sudden you've created risk for the client that hired you, the company that you work for, not only your personal risk of your own health. And so knowing where those lines are and having your mind made up ahead of time really prevents a lot of mistakes.
That's a really good point. In fact, I'm going to actually use that with our team, because we sit down with them and we don't want them hurt. We do not want them hurt. They don't have the training that law enforcement does. They don't have it. Just because some of them are wearing a gun does not mean that can make it 10 times worse, quite frankly. Our franchise that's in South Carolina, we always meet when we go into a new market. We meet with the chief or the captain. We ask just to introduce ourselves. We want to know your feeling. In South Carolina, a security guard can detain and cuff and take into the jail someone. And I asked the captain, how do you feel about that? About security guards doing that? He goes, I don't like it. He said, I don't like it because, things get really sketchy when you try to take someone into custody. And, and I said, and so we told our franchisee, we would really recommend that you don't do that. I mean, I don't know if the customer is really expecting you to do that, but that's a really good, what are the expectations and what is that outcome if it goes there? Because sometimes things get out of hand and it can accelerate fast. I mean, we have in Spokane about 140 full-time employees. There are 12 that are armed. And sometimes you need that. I mean, we did federal marshal moves. For the Marshal Service, we moved their federal prisoners. We had a special setup for that. We've done all that stuff, but the bread and butter security, it's to observe and report and then call you.
Right.
And so do you find that in this community the companies are generally doing that, or is it a very, is it on a scale?
I think they, well, I mean, we don't have anybody that I'm aware of is arresting people and doing anything like that. The law just doesn't allow it.
Well, you can't here. No, not in the state of Washington. No.
So what I would say is, a lot of this is, and I'll connect the dots here for you because you're going to be like, what does this have to do with free markets, right? So we have free markets. And granted, law enforcement has the market cornered on arrest authority and everything like that. Yep. But if you think about attracting employees, there's a market for employees with skill sets. If you want a security company to provide people who have the same skill sets as law enforcement, well, when you're arming these employees, there's a tremendous amount of risk there, right, which means you have to invest in people who have the skills, the abilities, who can handle that liability. Well, you've got to pay them a lot more than you pay the people.
And you have to constantly train them.
And that's no joke. It's expensive.
Very. And
you have to insure them. You have to insure your company. Yep. So that's going to drive the cost up. And at some point, right, when you're trying to train your employees up to a level where they can function in a way that your risk is lower, well, a lot of them are going to be like, well, why don't I just go do that over there at the law enforcement? And now you're trying to compete with us, which is expensive. Yep. That's why you see in this area right now, companies like Walmart saying, well, we're going to start paying, overall, well, they're paying our deputies like $93 an hour to sit in their parking lot and keep crime down and keep everything like that. Well, that's really tough for private security. I just don't know that the market bears that. Most companies can't afford that.
No, it can't. And you're exactly right. And what we tell them is, let's go to this. We have the luxury, thankfully, of we can say, look, this requires an off-duty. We use the Sheriff's Department can work for us, Liberty Lake Police can work for us, troopers can work for us. And so we'll often say, look, what I would highly recommend is that you put in an off-duty officer in their uniform. And what it does is it gives us comfort that the individual knows what they're doing. It tells the client, you've got somebody there. It is amazing to me how many security companies that have armed guards they're so woefully uninsured. And wait till something happens. I mean, our liability insurance is a fortune, but we have a very, thankfully, knock on wood, we've never had to execute it. But it's that balance. And back in the day, the law enforcement officers, they were getting so much overtime. Well, they were doing extra gigs because they weren't, I should say. But a lot of these departments are not staffed, so they're already getting plenty of overtime, so they don't need to work outside to do the side gigs. And so it is interesting that you tied it to that, because it really is. But we just really try to respect what you do, and know kind of our place. And then we also know when it's, Johnny said he's going to come back and he's going to kill everybody at work. And we're saying, well, you know what? I think you really want an off-duty officer here for that. Someone that's in the uniform, not Larry. And we are worried about our staff. We're very proud that when our staff, we've had a lot of our employees go to work for you and for the city, and they'll tell us, I want to go into law enforcement. We'll say, fantastic. Then can we have you as long as you're willing to work for us, and then go on to that and
one
that.
thing that you were kind of talking about that kind of brought this to my mind is the security folks operate within your authority, but they're fantastic witnesses. They know how to put pen to paper and write what they saw, which is not the case with the general public a lot of times. And again, if you're thinking about going into law enforcement and you need to do work that interests you and you think security might be it, well, that's a great place to come in and get your feet under you and get your head right about knowing what your role is, know what your authority is, work on report writing, work on documenting what you do. What a great place to start.
And verbal skills. Major would say, I'd say, who's out there with you? Because he was with State Patrol, he's out in Ritzville or something, and he goes, my backup's like 40 minutes away. And he said, you just had to really learn how to verbally manage the situation, because physically managing the situation with 4 individuals in the car, 1 officer, knowing that they don't know that backup's that far away, but how you verbally handle that. And so we try to tell our teams that your verbal skills are just as important as anything else.
Well, they might be one of the most important tools that a cop has. When I was out working the street, it was not uncommon when it was you on a call, maybe you and a partner on a call, and that was it. It wasn't like some of these urban areas where you have 4 cops show up,
or 2 to a car, or something.
You learned how to talk with people and negotiate with them, and talk them into a pair of handcuffs instead of give you one warning, and if you don't do what I say, all of a sudden you got 5 cops on you. Police work didn't, and it shouldn't work that way, right? I mean, our go-to should be convincing people, the power of persuasion into doing what we need them to do. And it's a skill. We're having to help develop that more now than ever with some of our people, to put the phone down and get away from a screen, because, you can't convince them to, comply through text. That's a critically important skill. And again, if you're in a security role and you're not armed and you have to confront and deal with somebody, well, I can't think of a better, more real world place to develop that.
Well, when I was a general manager of a hotel, 500-room hotel, I couldn't go up to the guest and say, get the F out of here, pal. What are you doing? I'd have to say, good evening. It looks like we're having fun this evening. Look what we like. Because everyone's watching how we're going to interact with this guest. And so that's what I wanted to kind of infuse. And Major at first thought I was a little crazy. But and then GoJoe Patrol, when we came up with the name, he went to work and he shared it with his other troopers, and they said it was a stupid idea as well. Stupid name. And now he's very happy.
Well, look at it now.
So I told him, I go, no, that was wrong. So anyway, but I don't have time, and maybe I'll have you back. This Proposition 1 has been passed at the city. I know that the county is a little bit different from that, but I just hope we stay in the direction of what we've talked about before, and you have personal experience that individuals are held accountable to get help, because that the compassionate to leave them there doesn't work, and you have that experience firsthand. And I think that as we navigate through this, we're at a point here where it could go either way again, and it's going to be very interesting to see where we go. But what I want to leave on is, they all know you as the sheriff. They certainly, I think, appreciate what you do. I know they do. But what don't they know about you? What is it that you do for fun? What is it that who is the man under or behind that cowboy hat? Who is John Nowels when he's not protecting the county?
I have been blessed to have been married to my wife for 35 years. I hope a lot of people get the experience of finding their soulmate. And
40 years for me.
Perfect. Well,
Yep.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
And I love spending time with her.
Yep.
I love the outdoors, grew up, out in the outdoors, water skiing, snow skiing. And probably the last 10 years, I spend a ridiculous amount of time out standing in a river, fly fishing. I tell people that when I think it was 16 years old, the first time I picked up a fly rod in my hand, and I was standing down in Fish Creek over in Montana. Yeah. And I don't know how to explain it other than that was in that moment, standing there in that river, fishing. It was the first place I actually felt centered. Yeah. And I have always loved moving water, rivers since then. I spend a ridiculous amount of time in rafts and drift boats and things like that because that's where I find peace.
Yeah, you can escape.
Yep, I can escape.
Do you do the casting?
Yep.
Yeah, there's got to be something therapeutic about that too.
Well, and what I find it to be is, for a couple hours at a time, your focus is on making this really, really small fake bug look like it's not attached to 60 feet of line so a fish will eat it. Yeah. I don't think I could put it more eloquently than this. One of my favorite outdoor writers said that fly fishing is the pursuit of that which is elusive but attainable. And that sums it up for me.
Yes.
And you can be focused on that.
Yep.
And it's just great. And I have a great group of friends. My wife loves fly fishing with me.
All
of my kids are avid fly fishermen. I have a son who's a fly fishing guide. He's an outfitter down in Nashville. Yep. And, here in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the whole family up here in North Idaho, and we're going to spend a week as river rats and just having a great time. Kids, grandkids, spouses.
That very
everything.
sport is what keeps our best coach in the whole world, Mark Few, here. Yep. That's his therapy too. Same thing.
It is, and I understand it.
Yep.
It's just the place to be.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, John, thank you very much. Thanks for what you do. I genuinely mean that, and we're very lucky to have you as our sheriff. And maybe you'll agree to come back and talk to me again about the ever-changing landscape.
I absolutely will. And frankly, I've been blessed that the voters put me here, and looks like they'll get me for another 4 years.
I'm happy about that. All right. Thanks, John. Thanks.